Tonight's speaker and teacher is going to be Nicole Parker. I've known Nicole for, I don't know, many different years. I think since 2003, I think it's been.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, and Nicole was, along with her husband, were teaching the AFCO, the Amazing Facts College of Evangelism program. They're now at Southern Adventist University, and they're involved in teaching. She teaches a course on human sexuality. She's a counselor. She's got many sermons on Audioverse. She's written books. She's a woman of God. I'll tell you this, from someone who knows Nicole very well, she is the real deal. Like, she is legitimately someone who really has integrity in their life, someone who really loves the Lord and is mindful of what's going on in the world around us. And she has a burden for people, a deep care for people. So Nicole, I'd like to welcome you to this Growth Labs. And yeah, so Nicole, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
By the way, everybody, if you can just keep your audio on mute, that's going to be good so it doesn't interrupt, and any background noises that might just kind of be a distraction from this Growth Lab. So yeah, again, if you have questions or whatever, put it in the chat box. You can also ask very anonymous questions to CCC Young Adults. If you open up the chat, you can actually send anonymous questions, as anonymous can be, to that, and we'll make sure that your name is not tagged to that question whatsoever. Nicole, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I've been married for almost 19 years now to the man of my dreams, and I'm so blessed, but I'm also very grateful for the time that I had before I got married. I was 27 when I married my husband, and my mom had given up on me finding anybody to marry. When I finally told her I was interested in somebody, she was like, great, marry him, basically, because she just was like, I'm never going to get grandchildren. So, you know, I'm very grateful for God bringing me to the man of my dreams and for all these years of marriage. But some of the lessons that I learned when I was single were just priceless, and the friendships that I built. And I just want to share some of both sides of that fence, the single years, the married years, the things that I've reaped from understanding the gospel in both contexts.
Okay, very good. Now, Nicole, obviously many people here we're dealing with the situation with the shelter in place because of the coronavirus, this pandemic. And yeah, and the time that people are trying to understand community, it's very challenging. Can we break down what community is all about from a biblical perspective, how we should understand community in light of the fact that we need to have a recommended 6 feet distance from each other? How do we understand community at a time like this?
You know, this is such a good question, and I have so many people ask me as I teach students at Southern, and also just friends. I had a friend contact me just this week saying, is it wrong of me that I'm lonely now that I'm in quarantine? It's even worse. I miss my friends, but I also wish I had a spouse to be here with me. And I'm questioning, you know, why isn't God giving that to me? And right now, as the loneliness is overwhelming, a lot of people I know are feeling that way.
Okay, good. What can we learn about community as far as from a biblical perspective? Like, what would be a good understanding of God's perspective of community?
Well, you know, when we look at community, people ask the question, is it wrong of me to long for a relationship with another person? I think this is so important for us to understand as the foundation of everything we understand in the gospel, is that God is a communal being. He's a relational being who is three persons. God could love before he created anybody to love. And it's so important for us as image bearers of God to embrace that part of us. There's nothing sinful about longing to have somebody else that we have deep relationship with. That's beautiful. It's part of what makes us godlike.
Okay, awesome.
I mean, even from the very beginning, when Adam was created, this is what I find so profound. God creates Adam. Adam's living in a perfect garden. Everything is beautiful, and he has a relationship with God. He loves God. He loves where he is. He's never hot, never cold. Nothing bad ever happens. And then God says, now I want to have you do something, Adam. I want you to name all these animals. And Adam names the animals. And Moses writes this, you know, hundreds of years later, when he tells the story, he tells that as a significant part of the story, that Adam names the animals first. And then he turns to God and says, you know, I noticed something. All of them have two. Where is my other one? And I just picture God smiling this beautiful smile and saying, I was just waiting for you to ask. Because he wanted Adam to understand what it's like to not have another one to serve. And the fact that Adam could then say, you know, everything is perfect, but there's something missing. It just proved that Adam was in the image of God as a being who wanted another one like himself to serve. Because God is a triune God who was always able to love others like himself. And Adam, in God's image, longed for the same thing. He wanted to be able to serve another one like himself. Not just God, not just the angels, not just the animals, but another one like himself. So that longing is a God-given gift. It was in Eden before sin, and there's nothing bad about it.
Okay, excellent, excellent. So right now we were discussing, bringing up discussing the idea of loneliness right now. Lots of people are dealing with loneliness. You can have a house full of people and still be very, very lonely. But lots of people are experiencing, since their routine has changed, they're not in the same social circles anymore. They're not even, many people aren't even seeing people. I mean, if you live in Chowchilla, you're not seeing people for days at a time. So it's just a very challenging time. And many people are trying to figure out about loneliness. Is it bad? How do we understand this? I'm going to give the time over to you, Nicole. So if you want to just start just leaping into this idea about loneliness, flushing it out. And by the way, if you start having questions, those that are listening, go ahead and write that down in your chat box, and we'll try to hit those questions in time. But yeah, Nicole, I'm going to give the time over to you, and you can just kind of launch into this discussion about loneliness. How do we understand it? How do we deal with it? And yeah, what's God? What's the factor of God in this whole formula? So yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you. You know, this is one thing I want people to understand. Adam needed Eve because he didn't have anyone like himself that he could love. We don't have to get married as the only antidote for loneliness, because we have other people that we can love. But, you know, for a lot of people who are single, they see marriage as the antidote to loneliness. If only I could be married and be in quarantine with my spouse, then everything would be wonderful. But unfortunately, marriage can be kind of like, you know, they say like the revolving door. Those who are on the inside are wanting to get out. Those on the outside wanting to get in. Many people who are quarantined with their spouse are miserable and wishing that they weren't. And sadly, we're seeing a lot of the domestic violence statistics shoot up in many areas, because being at home doesn't necessarily mean being safe and happy for many people. So getting a spouse is not the solution to loneliness. Neither is just having God. How do we handle the reality that we are communal beings longing for connection with other people? I think it's important that we realize there's nothing sinful about being lonely. There's nothing sinful about Adam saying, hey, God, where is my other one? But at the same time, we often substitute. You know, we love to find something that will give us a shortcut to happiness instead of connecting deeply with God. So I think that's the first question that we need to ask ourselves sometimes. Am I lonely because I'm dodging deep connection with God and I'm wanting to find some other person to make me feel better? And it doesn't have to be people that we turn to. Sometimes when we're lonely, we'll turn to binge eating or binge movie watching or whatever it is. If we're not connecting deeply with God, whatever else we turn to is going to be an idol. So I want to go to sharing my screen just briefly here and talking about some of the things that I've discovered. One important thing that we forget is that community is built on communication and quality time. So we can have communication. Thankfully, we're not living during the 1800s when if you were stuck in a cabin out in the middle of the prairie, that was it. You didn't have anybody around except the people that were right there. And maybe you could make a trip into town every few months. Community is built on communication and quality time, and all of us have the ability right now. If you're able to communicate and connect through this, video chat, we have the ability to communicate. How can we have quality time with other people? This is something that sometimes we don't really maximize, both the relationships with people who are close by us, maybe in our homes with us, and people who are far away, but that we want to maximize meaningful time with. Some of my best friends don't live here in Collegedale with me. In fact, one of them is in South Africa. One of them lives in Washington. So we are separated by many time zones, and, we don't get to see each other. We haven't seen each other in years. Another one of my friends is down in Florida, but I don't see her very often either. And often the way that we connect is by intentional communication and quality time, realizing that we don't have to be in the same place to be in one spirit. And sometimes just praying with somebody, reaching out to somebody will be one of the most quality things that we can do. And don't beat ourselves up for the fact that we need communication. Remember, God is a community. God is a communal God. His law is a relational law. The law of God says two things: love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. So even if we love God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, if we don't reach out and pour out love toward other people, we are not keeping the law of God completely. So God wants us to long for community. He delights in that. It reflects his character. Some of us are more extroverted, some of us are more introverted, and there are the ambiverts among us like me that love quality time with other people and love time all by ourselves. It's beautiful. All of those ways are beautiful. Remember that the Sabbath is a day that God has given for communication and quality time with God. Many of us haven't maximized some of the benefits of our opportunities to spend time with God. And I see this quarantine as just one of the greatest gifts that God could give. Now, I don't think that God sent a disease, not at all. But I think God knew that there were some of us that could maximize quality time with him, with maybe our family members, with time to read the things we never have time to read, time to do the jobs we never have time to do, time to go for walks in nature. Not everyone has a lot of time right now. There are medical professionals and others that are just completely overwhelmed with lots of extra work. People like me, I have 4 teenagers at my house. I'm pretty busy. But it's a good time. Still, I'm able to focus on connecting with my kids, spending time with them, cooking with them, cleaning with them, reading together. These are good things that we can do with the people who are close to us. Now, you may be trapped in quarantine with people you don't always get along with, but God has a plan in that too. He wants us to learn how to persevere in loving relationships. And sometimes that's not going to be comfortable and easy, but it's still beautiful. So when we want to build relationships with other people in meaningful community, often the best thing that we can do is focus on communicating with them, asking them questions, not like, what do I want to do with my spare time, but how can I minister to this other person? And that's sometimes the question we don't ask often enough. Now, Anil, you'd mentioned we wanted to talk about community, about loneliness, and about romance. I think that in order to really do that the best, we kind of have to turn around in the opposite direction. So community becomes the first topic that we talk about, reflecting God's character by communicating first with him and having quality time with him, and then flowing out of that deep fullness. Instead of being thirsty and hunting for somebody to make us feel better, we can communicate and minister to others out of a fullness of connection with God first. Just like Adam and Eve, when Adam wanted connection with God and connection with Eve, that was beautiful. But when he had to choose between the two and he chose Eve, he lost both. When we know that we need time with God, but we look for somebody else to spend time with first, we prioritize something else first, we often cheat ourselves out of both having meaningful time with that person or engaging in that activity wisely, and we cheat ourselves out of connection with God. So community is the first thing to deal with, building healthy relationships with God and with others. And then out of that, we can deal meaningfully and in a balanced way with our loneliness, recognizing loneliness is just a reality when we're human beings in the image of God. Now, for those who are struggling with loneliness, I think we have some significant questions we can reflect on. First of all, I would suggest if you're feeling lonely, ask yourself, am I engaging in healthy community with God and with others? First thing in the morning when I wake up, am I grabbing my phone? Am I turning to food? Or am I connecting in meaningful ways with God? It's not like the only time we can spend with God is first thing in the morning. Some people prefer to have their devotional time at night, but sometimes if we don't make it our first priority, it just drifts away and everything else swallows up our day. So am I engaging in healthy community with God first and then with others? And if not, how can I pursue that goal? You know, for many of us, we're very busy in quarantine, but other people are bored and feeling purposeless. And when we're alone, sometimes the lies that Satan tells us just get magnified. It's like, my life is purposeless. Well, is it really? If so, maybe I'm not living for the glory of God, because God can be glorified by a person who is incapable of doing much of anything just by their connection with God. I believe that this opportunity might separate kind of the wheat from the tares, the sheep from the goats. The way that we spend our time demonstrates where our hearts are. So if I'm not engaging in healthy community with God or with others, if maybe I'm spending my time thinking about myself, going, why does nobody want to spend time with me? Why am I so lonely? If we're withdrawing from meaningful community, that's the time to pursue the goal of first filling up in time with God and then reaching out for others. How can I serve other people? Who can I send a text to encourage them? Who can I send a promise to? Who can I call and say, hey, how are you doing? So that kind of leads into the second question here. Am I longing for an opportunity to serve or to be served? This, I think, kind of touches on the romance idea, because for many people, when they say, if only I had a partner, the things that they long for, the things that they dream of having are fundamentally selfish. And you know, to some degree, that's normal. When you don't have somebody, then you imagine what it would be like to have somebody. Well, you imagine the things that you would enjoy with that person. But when I'm longing for a relationship with a meaningful, significant other, am I longing for opportunities to serve the other person? Or am I thinking, boy, wouldn't it be nice to have somebody who understood me, who listened to me, who wanted to do the things I want to do? Because the most meaningful community that we can have with other people is when we are in a cycle of service. We're not looking for somebody to satisfy us. We're looking for a way to pour out the love that God has filled our hearts with. So if I'm looking for somebody that I can share with about the beautiful things God is doing in my heart and my life, that's powerful. If I'm looking for, maybe I can sew masks to help other people. Can I go out and do sidewalk chalk art in front of the hospital and encourage people? What things can we do to reach out and serve others? It's easy to kind of spiral. And many times I see a person spiral when they're overwhelmed or scared, depressed, worrying about what they're going to, how are they going to pay for their rent, things like that. It's easy to spiral into self-focus. And self-focus is really the enemy of all peace and fulfillment. So then ask also, am I looking for a person to fill an aching void that only God can really fill? This is where we get to the heart of the issue. Loneliness is a reality in a world of sin, because sometimes people are going to let us down. People will die. People will move away. People will misunderstand us. People won't prioritize us. People will hurt us, and meaningful relationships that are vulnerable will give opportunities for us to be hurt. But if I'm looking for relationships primarily for fulfillment of my needs, that's not the highest plan that God has for my relationships with others. So God wants us to reflect wisely. And when we really ask those questions well, I think we need to grapple with, am I making accusations against the character of God? You know, often I hear people ask things like, well, so how come God isn't giving me the relationship I long for? Why is God holding back? Is this what it's going to be like my whole life? Am I going to end up with never finding somebody? And then when someone comes along who seems like they have promise, they just jump and say, well, at least I'll have somebody, at least I'll get married. But the question we need to ask is, am I making an accusation that God is withholding good gifts from those that seek him? You know, does he seem to be keeping back what I long for? He wants us to be richly fulfilled. Am I escaping anything as a God replacement? Is there something that I want, but if he doesn't give it to me, then I will go to something else? Sometimes that could be food, it can be music, it can be movies, it can be binging on YouTube, or even cooking, working, other things. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. If I'm escaping to something else to give me a sense of worth or lovability, instead of meaningful relationship with God, that's where I may be in big trouble. And then ask if I am escaping to anything else, and probably most of us in our times in quarantine are tempted to use our time in wasteful ways and escape to something else to give us meaning, to give us a sense of worth or lovability. If I am escaping to anything else, what promises can I apply? How can I ask God, what is it I'm really longing for? And then look in his word for places he promises to give me that. He doesn't promise that we're always going to feel happy and fulfilled, but he does promise that he will give us the desires of our hearts. He will give us the good gifts we need, not necessarily the things that we want, that we pick out and say, no, that's what would make me really happy. But instead he says, I will supply all your needs. If we're longing for someone's arms, maybe we need to go to a promise that says that underneath are the everlasting arms. God will carry us. If we're longing for someone to understand us, or somebody who will never leave us, maybe we need to say, Lord, you have promised you will never leave me or forsake me. You read the things that are going on in my heart. You number the hairs on my head. You mark when I sit down and when I rise up. As we apply those promises in deep and meaningful ways, God will become more and more of a real, living, close best friend to us. So I often tell people, when you're struggling with something like this, look at the parable of the sower. You don't take a sword and just scrape it over the ground. But many times that's how people study the Bible. They scrape a promise over it. Well, the Lord has said that he loves me with an everlasting love, so I'm going to claim that, and then they walk away. But God wants us to point that promise at the actual struggle going on in our hearts, and not just to tap it like this, but to really put force behind it. Say, Lord, you have said that if I abide in you and you abide in me, that you will bear much fruit in my life. Lord, what do you want to do? What fruits do you want to bear in my life? This is a time for meaningful communion with God. Very few people spend that hour in prayer with God that they need, that would empower them to live an abundant life. So this is the time to take time in quality prayer, communion with God, and then out of that flow into a life of, how can I serve others in the midst of this? Rather than thinking, how can God satisfy my lonely heart? It's how can I engage in meaningful connection, communication, and quality time with other people and minister to them? How can I serve in this time? Not how can I be served? So loneliness makes us naturally self-focused, and time alone can do the same thing. But by God's grace, he wants to turn this around, I believe, and help us to do exactly the opposite, to find in him a fountain of living water and then reach out to others. So I think you're mute, Anil. There we go. Oops.
Those are amazing questions to ask yourself in the time of reflection. What would you say are practical things, maybe a few practical things that you would say for your average young adult that's home? They're not considered essential workers. They're at home. They're, you know, there may be some family in the house. There may not be, but for them who are just struggling, let's say, with intense feelings of loneliness, just separated from their social circle, or perhaps maybe they never had a really good social circle to begin with, and this just kind of amplifying it in more physical ways, I guess. What practical things would you say to someone like that? Yeah.
I would say prayer is the breath of the soul. It is the secret of spiritual power, according to the Steps to Christ. Take time in meaningful communication with God. For example, journaling. You know, you don't have to have a fancy journal, but writing, it can even be on your computer as long as you're not going to get distracted, or on your phone. You can even do some sort of, you know, just recording your prayer and going back to God. Find ways to connect meaningfully with God. It might even be through art or music, but engage in meaningful communication with God about what's going on in your heart. I have seen so many people who in 10 minutes can send themselves into a depressive spiral that it takes them days or weeks to get out of, repeating over and over in their minds something along the lines of, nobody wants to be with me anyway. I wish that I could have this, but I can't. Nothing will ever work out for me. I never. This is what happens to me. My life is like this. My luck always. So take time in meaningful connection with God. Don't engage in accusations against his character, saying, but I don't know if God will really connect with me. He says, you will seek me and find me if you search for me with all your heart. God is not sitting up in heaven with his arms crossed saying, try a little harder, then maybe I'll reach down and help you. He's longing to connect with us far more than we long to connect with him. So the thing that holds us back is our lack of intensity, our lack of passion to serve him, to grow close to him. When God reaches out to us, let us not abandon him and turn away from his invitation and go open the fridge or our cell phone instead to look for satisfaction. Instead, God wants us to engage in meaningful communication and quality time with him. Bring to him the lies that Satan tells you. You know what it's like. Every one of us has listened to those things, and for each of us, they're different lies, but there are lies that ring in our heads when we're down. Things that go through our head over and over. You never get it right. You always. Nobody wants you. Whatever those things are, when the devil tells you those things, get out a piece of paper and write them down. And then evaluate them prayerfully. Say, God, is this really true? What do you say in your word? And then get to the heart of what the lie is that the devil is telling you, because they're always lies, essentially saying that God is not love. And maybe the lies, you just need to follow them down to the root, like a weed. You can't get the weed out if you just pull off the leaves. You've got to get down to the root of it. So what's the root? When Satan tells you you're so fat, okay, well, maybe you are overweight, maybe you're not. But when Satan says that, what's the real root lie there? The real root lie is that my value is less because of the way that I look. That's not true. What does the Bible say? What does God say about what you're worth? What does God say about how much you're loved? Because all the way through Scripture, you have the truths of creation and redemption woven through, saying that I have loved you with an everlasting love. I've formed you in the womb. I have a plan for you, a purpose for you. I will give you hope in a future. These promises are there. God cannot lie. The problem is we turn our eyes away from the promises and we live in the darkness. We wallow in the sewer when all we have to do is reach our hand up to God in faith, and he'll pull us out, wash us clean, and help us to walk in the sunlight. But the sad thing is we don't believe he can do it. And there's something about faith that Jesus himself couldn't heal those who couldn't believe that he could heal them. When the man came to him with his son and said, if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. What did Jesus say? He said, if you can believe, all things are possible. All sin starts with unbelief, which leads to pride. That means all righteousness starts with God planting the seed of faith, which leads to humility. And humility does not live self-focused. Humility does not see me and what I want as the center of everything.
Nicole, here's another question. Yeah. For the person that is alone, you talked about prayer and connection, communion with God. What else can they do with their time? Like, what in a time again when people are alone, they can't go to the store, can't go to the gym, can't go to work. How do they grow? What can they do while they're at home? How do they fill up their time in productive ways and grow as individuals?
Great question. I think one of the first things that a person can do in that situation is sit down with a piece of paper and make a list of 5 to 10 people that you can minister to. It could be people you need to pray for, people you can reach out to and encourage. It could be, there's some medical professionals in my community who need some help. Maybe I can help make masks. Maybe I can buy a piece of poster board next time I go to the grocery store and make a sign encouraging them. Go and tape it to the ER window. Whatever it is that we can do, there is always a way we can minister. There are probably people that you know within your contacts list who are more deeply depressed than you are, more scared and anxious than you are. Family members you may need to work through conflicts with. Are there people that you haven't yet made things right with who you need to? These are opportunities. There are books to read. There are audio sermons to listen to. There are many things that we can do, but first thing you have to do is be intentional. Come to God, say, God, this time that I have belongs to you. And many of us may be victorious or vanquished in the battle of life based on how we spend our spare time. Because if we think of it as spare time, if we think it belongs to us instead of to God, we're going to live for our own glory instead of for his. But if we realize this time belongs to God, we can use it in meaningful engagement. You know, Acts 1 is what comes before Acts 2. The disciples had to make things right with each other before the Holy Spirit could be poured out. I am convinced that God is doing great things in this world right now. And the first thing he wants is a generation of young people and older people willing to give themselves 100% passionately to God. My sons who are 13 or 14 have been memorizing chapters of scripture. My 13-year-old has memorized at least 10 chapters of the Bible this year. My 14-year-old has memorized 15 of them. There are apps you can look at that can help you to memorize. They use a Bible memory app that has helped them to memorize. This is not a time when you can't do anything. This is a time you have so many opportunities. The question is, Lord, what would you have me do with this time?
Okay, here's a third question before we transition, and that is this. And this is obviously it's overlapping with the last question, but how do you build community in a time like this? How do you make friends in a time like this? Good friendships. How do you connect with people in authentic ways that goes beyond the superficiality of social media?
Mm-hmm. Well, it can be hard to build a relationship from 0 to 100 right off. But if you have meaningful relationships with people, or there are people that maybe you've been wanting to reach out to, maybe coworkers or friends that you know are struggling, or family members that you need to work on relationship with them, this is a time to build more meaningful, intentional communication and connection with them. So when we want to build deeper relationships, we go to deeper levels in the things we talk about. Instead of just saying, so how's the weather over there? So you guys sick? Oh, I read this hilarious meme the other day. Instead, go deeper, like prayerfully ask, Lord, open up doors in my conversations. And then you can share something that's going on in your devotional time. Say, you know, I've just been reading this passage lately, reading in Matthew 24. I was so struck by this. I don't know why, I've never seen it before. Open up real conversations with real people. Help them by helping yourself. And, you know, as we read and study things, we'll learn much more effectively and cement the things we learn in our heads if we share them with other people. That's one of the most effective ways of learning. So look for opportunities to share what you're learning. Look for opportunities to listen more deeply. Many people who talk to you are battling with huge issues of discouragement, fear, anxiety, depression. Ask, how are you really doing? Is there anything I can do to encourage you? Are you are you scared? Is there a promise that you've been finding meaning out of? Draw deeper. You know, the outer circles of communication are things like facts, you know, opinions, things like that. But as you get deeper into what do people feel, their needs and fears, those are bonding areas. If you talk about what people need and what they fear, you can build a much deeper connection with them.
Okay, excellent. Again, I know you could talk a lot more about loneliness. You had a whole PowerPoint that you could have gone into. We're going to transition into romance, and so we got a series of questions plus those that are asking questions. Again, we won't be able to get to every question, but yeah, we'll get into certain questions. Okay, and again, if you have a question, feel free to write it in the chat box. It's kind of an abrupt turn, but I think it's part of this whole Growth Labs. Okay, here it is. Okay, first question is this, and Nicole, you may hate me and the people may hate me for this, but we probably need to, I'm just looking at the amount of questions. We may have, yeah, and so what I'll do is, unless you want to do it to yourself so I don't come across as a bad guy. So,
I don't mind if you look like the bad guy and they'll with me.
Okay, here it is. Let's talk about relationships, okay? Is it wrong to long for romantic relationship? Is that wrong? And I know it sounds, just a very generalized question, but people do wrestle with that sometimes, especially in the context of end time events. I know that sometimes Seventh-day Adventist young people can be like, man, like the Sunday law's around the corner. Like, it's not time for me to be, anyways, you get my point. So
yes. And I think we super spiritualize things sometimes. And the reality is God gave us hormones. They're not evil. It's okay. It's okay that we long for deep, intense relationships. It's okay that we have sexual longings. There's nothing sinful about that. God has created us to long for deep intimacy. He is a triune God, three who are one. And so marriage is one of those relationships that actually reveals the character of God when it's done well. Multiple beings who are one at the same time that they remain different personalities, different beings. So that's a beautiful thing to long for. And it's not just a distraction from the end of time. We do believe that we're living at the end of time. I believe it. But I also see that marriage and deep relationships with other people can be the best way for me to grow into the image of Christ and to understand more of who he is. I've learned so much from having my children, from being married, that has helped me to have a deeper and more living relationship with God. So it's not a distraction. It's in the days of Noah, they were marrying and giving in marriage and didn't know until the flood came. That's because they were distracted from God by those things. Those things can grow us closer to God instead of growing us farther from him.
Okay, here's the next question. So how does, compared, speaking about the talk you previously gave, how do you balance out the idea of, having appropriate longings for relationship, thinking about relationships, talking about relationships, praying about relationships, but not letting it be something that's consuming and depressing and overwhelming? Like, how do you keep a good balance? What would be, yeah.
The shortest and fastest way to answer that, I think, is seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. When you find that the first thing that you long for, every time that you're down, you start going, if only I had somebody, I just wish. That's probably an idol. Versus when you feel down, you go, Lord, I'm giving you my heart. I'm asking you to come and be with me. Thank you so much that you love me, that you satisfy me. That's the way to fill up. And then from within an attitude of fullness with God, we can say, Lord, I long to minister to somebody else. I love to minister in a team with somebody else. I long to be like you. And I feel like this is something that would help me. But Lord, you know what I need.
Okay, next question. Yeah, yeah, very good. I appreciate that. Next question is this. And by the way, people can message you on Facebook, right? If they want to do like follow-up
They
questions.
can, although I get an awful lot of those messages, so I can't always answer them, but I try.
There'll be a way. Maybe it may be a few months. Right? Okay. All right. Next question
Okay.
is this. What kind of qualities are good to look for in another person? Could you give us a few non-negotiables, and then maybe some other areas that you would just think, well, I guess obviously just, yeah, a
Let
little
me
bit.
crunch it together as fast as I can. Look
Bingo.
for two things: character and personality. Character is how much is this person like Jesus? Are they balanced? If you don't know if they have a temper problem, you don't know enough to marry them or to date them. Don't even try. Find out what their character is like in a wide variety of circumstances. Is this person displaying the fruits of the Spirit? You can see this sometimes if you're wide awake, if you're not being blinded by the hormones. How do they treat waitresses? How do they treat homeless people? How do they treat people who can do nothing for them or who will do nothing for them? How do they talk about the people who have hurt them in the past, their boss that gripes all the time at them and treats them badly? How do they talk about these people? Are they able to take responsibility when they mess up on something? One of the things that drew me to my husband the most at the beginning was that when we would talk, he would say, you know, here's something that I see that I did today, and I wish that I had handled it differently. I don't think I handled this situation best. And I thought, wow, you know, this guy is secure. He's not worried about admitting that he does anything wrong. Now we were getting to know each other 7 time zones apart. He was in South Africa, I was in New York. So yeah, I understand this romance long distance thing is excruciating. You think 6 feet apart is hard. Try 7 time zones.
Yeah, that's hard.
But God was able to help us to build a beautiful, deep relationship. And in some ways, the not being able to be right there next to each other was a huge benefit to us. It forced us to communicate about the things that really mattered. What kind of friendships do you value most? What areas would you like your marriage to be like your parents' marriage? What areas would you like it not to be like that? Um, so being long distance can help you to think things through more wisely, cool the hormones, and turn on the brain. Maximize where you are, bloom where you're planted. This is a great opportunity. And
Okay.
when you're evaluating character, remember that's not the only thing. The fact that this person is a wonderful Christian doesn't mean that's everything. Personality also matters. How much is this person like you? Do you
How
jive
much is
well?
a person like you?
How much are they like you? Yes. So there's how much is this person like Jesus? That's the
Okay.
most important thing. Pretty
Okay.
much any two people who have a deep relationship with God can build a beautiful, meaningful relationship. But how much is this person like you? Are you socially similar? Are you similar in energy levels, the ways you like to spend your time, um, lifestyle in general, convictions? Evaluate those things. So, how much is this person like Jesus? And how much is this person like you? Those two categories, you can fit pretty much everything important into them. But don't rush into something until you have a lot of information about those two things.
Okay, Nicole, but here's the thing though. How do you connect with people in such a way to learn about them without them feeling like you're leading them on or giving that impression yourself?
Yeah, that is going to be difficult sometimes if you don't yet know whether this is a relationship that's going to go in meaningful and positive directions. Um, I think, especially in an age of everybody being in quarantine, if you're connecting with a person intentionally, it may give an impression. But I think this is where it's important to prayerfully be casual, calm, and be respectful. Watch for the signs if the other person's going, not really. You don't want to make things awkward, and you need to be able to know them well. I would say don't start a dating relationship with somebody that you don't know in person well, just because you're in quarantine and you bond over similar things you're going through. Sometimes that's what's called a trauma bond, and it doesn't necessarily have any meaningful substance at the bottom of it.
Okay. Okay. How about this question right here? Is it normal to have fear and doubt about somebody you're dating because of the idea that you may end up with the wrong person?
Yes, I think that's normal and sometimes even healthy. If you realize that every hour of every day of all the rest of your life is going to be changed by who you marry, that ought to fill you with some serious thinking twice before you just leap into something based on he's really cute and we sat by each other at Vespers. You need to have an opportunity to think things through wisely before you just leap into something. But too much fear is not healthy. God does promise to guide us. He does not promise that if we follow him all the way, we'll never go through a breakup, we'll never be disappointed, and the first person we hold hands with is going to be the first person we marry. He never promised those things. He did promise that he would guide us, and even if he guides us into and out of relationships, we can learn rich, meaningful things from those situations. And if we hold ourselves back from getting too involved physically and being premature about things, then hopefully there will be a minimum of heart-shattering disappointment in the midst of that.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, here's another question, and that is this. How do you sense God's leading? How do you sense God's okay or affirmation on this relationship? I think a lot of people want God many times to tell them, which would be easier, but God most of the time doesn't do that. But so how do you know, though, that God's approving upon this thing?
You know, sometimes we're just plain chicken. We want God to keep us from going through pain. And we like the idea that if we surrender everything to God, nothing bad will happen to us. But that's simply not true. So I think going slowly is a critical part of being able to engage in wise directions in our relationships. Gathering a lot of information before we make commitments. My husband and I talk about this sometimes in our seminars, that people often go into premature intimacy, physical or emotional, and we confuse ourselves. Intimacy without commitment spells confusion, if not disaster. But if we get involved physically or emotionally very intensely when we don't know this person well, then we set ourselves up for probably being disappointed. So when you want God to lead, go slowly, crawl in love instead of falling in. Usually when you fall in something, it's a disaster. When you crawl in, you know what you're getting into. And I think that's a healthy balance. Pray and watch. Keep your eyes open as to what's going on. And don't tell yourself lies because you want so much to be in this relationship. Well, I'm sure it was just a bad day and that's why they did that. No, be aware.
Okay. When is it a bad idea? When should you be like, okay, we're striking out here. This is not going to work. I need to end this thing. When would you come to that conclusion in a healthy way?
Yes, if I see a person who is significantly not demonstrating the fruits of the Spirit, that's going to give me pause for concern. If I see them blow up and kick the dog, that's it. I don't need to know what this guy is going to be like. He kicked the dog. Why would you kick a dog? The thing is, in some situations, you know, if somebody shoves you, yells at you, you find them lying about anything, these are significant reasons that you should say, whoa, that's not something that I'm willing to do. Because when a person, let's say they lie, just that situation all by itself, if they have lied, it's not just an impulsive thing. You have to cultivate an attitude of deception before you come to the point where you will outright lie. So they've already done some work of pushing away the voice of the Holy Spirit to come to the point where they could lie to you. And if they can lie, how can you trust them? It's going to take at least a lot of time in a variety of circumstances that you see them demonstrating trustworthiness before you can go back to trusting them wisely in any way. So am I saying if a person ever raises their voice, if they ever tell a little white lie, then they're, you know, automatically out of it forever? Well, I know we have to be careful on that. But when I see a person intentionally engage in deception, that's very serious to me. Somebody's walking into the zoo and says, yeah, this kid is 10 and I know the kid is 12 and should be, you know, should cost more, but this person just lied. It's the little things that tell you what the person is like in their hearts. Believe it when you see it.
Okay, gotcha. Who should make the first move? We're living in a different society, a different age.
Yes, we are.
Should it be the knights in shiny armor? Should it be the The princess in the tower. I mean, who should make the first move here?
Well, I'm not going to say that I have the Spirit of God on this. Ruth makes the first move toward Boaz, but that's a unique situation where she is basically asking him to fulfill a responsibility toward her. Generally, and you can call me old-fashioned, I'm not saying that this is the law of God, but I don't find that people want to have this beautiful story of a proposal where the person whisks out a bouquet of roses and gets down on one knee and says, "Will you marry me?" And the guy bursts into tears and throws his arms around her and says, "Yes." That's just not the way we picture it. That's not oh, wow, what a beautiful proposal. I did know somebody whose father got proposed to by his girlfriend who said, "Guess what? We're getting married today." And she had already brought the priest or preacher or whatever, and it was a surprise wedding, and the groom didn't know he was getting married that day. Okay. But if you don't want to move toward a situation in which the woman has to take the initiative on everything, then I would say let a guy do it. Because what I find in general is when a woman takes the first step and actually, and I don't mean you can't, initiate conversations and things like that, but to actually make a serious move and say, "Look, I'm really interested in you," for a woman to do that, usually it just sets up a layer of insecurity for her, saying, "Well, would he have come after me if I hadn't asked?" And for a guy, men generally love to pursue, and for him to feel like, "Well, I don't know if I would have chosen her if she didn't just cast herself in front of me," it can put in a layer of doubt in both minds. So call me old-fashioned, maybe I'm wrong. I'm not saying this is the law for all time or that God doesn't lead in other ways, but I think in general, a secure guy is not going to stand back whimpering and waiting to see whether the girl likes him enough so that he doesn't have to risk. He'll have the courage and guts to risk, and if he doesn't, maybe there's something wrong with him.
Okay. So here's a question. How long should you be waiting for somebody? Sometimes there's this notion of that person's not interested in me. I'm going to wait like 1 year for them. I'm going to wait 2 years from them. I'm going to wait 10 years from them. Like, when should you be like, all right, it's time for me to ditch this thing. Like, I need to step out of this. It ain't going to work. They're not changed. Like, we hear all these stories of, oh, and after like 7 months of me praying, they changed their mind and they fell in love. How do we, realistically, what are we talking about here?
If you have to put a time on it, maybe you're not really in love with this person. If this person rises above everybody else that you've ever known, and you're like, "Wow, I would rather marry that person than anybody else I've ever known," maybe you just say, "Lord, you tell me." But I would tell a person, never marry whoever is willing when there was somebody else that was your dream partner that you were just like, "Wow, if only I could be married to that person." Because that's just not, it's not fair to the person you are marrying to say, "Well, I picked him because he was willing. He asked and the other guy never was going to." There's just something wrong there. If this is the right person, and I'm not saying that God matches people up. I don't think there's only one person you can marry. There were probably 5 different guys that I could have married and had a beautiful, rich, fulfilling marriage. But I asked the Lord to put me together with the one that would be the best, the one that we would bring the most souls to heaven because I married him. That's what I asked for. And I believe that the Lord led me to my husband. And I'm so grateful that I waited and I didn't just go for some of the guys that asked sooner than that, because I was waiting for somebody that I had that deep, intense connection with that I didn't have with anybody else. Now that can grow as you communicate and connect with a person. They say sometimes you have to kiss a lot of frogs to get to the prince. I don't want to take that too literally, but sometimes you have to get to know several people and just go, "Well, great, but not exactly what I'm looking for." And there's no sin in that.
Okay. Okay, this goes to the next question. Why is it that some people seem to find somebody right away and then others, they're not finding somebody right away?
The people who find somebody right away obviously are blessed by God and the others are not, right? No, that's not it. I think there are a lot of reasons. Sometimes it's just the fact that some people are in a place where there are lots of people around that they can get to know. Some people are just naturally more attractive, more winning. They have beautiful faces or bouncy personalities. Who knows? But what I do think is important is to realize that every person is priceless in the eyes of God. If nobody is asking you out, don't let that hit your sense of worth, because God has a beautiful plan for your life. And whether that means getting married or not, he loves you with an everlasting love, and you are beautiful and you are so loved.
Mm-hmm. Okay, here's you got a little bit more time, Nicole?
Sure.
Okay, we can do part 2 later on.
We may need to.
Yeah, lots of questions here. Okay, here's a few questions. We'll just go through it. So, physical boundaries. What are good physical boundaries before when you start to get to know them, to the time you get married? Like, what would you recommend? I know there's nothing spoken of in scripture specifically about physical boundaries besides fornication, outside marriage. But yeah.
Right. I think one of the things that's important is that we have to realize that each person has convictions of their own, but two people need to respect one another's convictions. So if one person is convicted, no kissing until marriage, and the other person doesn't share that conviction, the person who doesn't have that conviction pressures the person who does have that conviction to live by their conviction and said, no, let's go ahead and kiss because I don't have any conviction against it. There's something wrong there. When the other person is convicted not to do something and you want to violate their conviction, you're encouraging them to do something that makes them feel guilty and separated from God. And, it's defying the voice of the Holy Spirit in their minds. Now, if their conviction is just way out there, extremely conservative, well, then maybe you need to go back to the character and personality. This person may be very close to being like Jesus, but they may not match you very well if they have dramatically different convictions from you. So it's just a clue that maybe there are some areas that you're not alike in. But in general, I use the illustration of if you were buying a peach orchard and the peaches weren't ripe yet, but you knew this was going to be your orchard, would you climb over the fence and steal green peaches from yourself, knowing that these are going to be my peaches later on? I hope not, because green peaches just aren't nearly as good as ripe peaches. If you're going to be together with this person all of your life, why not wait until the peaches ripen? Why not wait until it's as rich as possible? In general, the more deep emotional connection, the more you love each other genuinely, the more sweet and rich and wonderful the peaches will be when it's your turn, when it's time. And if you steal them beforehand, you'd steal from yourself. Plus, you run the very real risk that maybe this peach orchard isn't actually going to be yours. Maybe you're stealing from someone else. And especially when you're encouraging the other person to do something that harms their relationship with God, that's encouraging them to do something idolatrous. Even if you are going to get married, even if this is the right person and all of that, you cheat yourselves. As Solomon said, do not awaken love until it's time.
Okay. Parents, how much should parents be involved in this decision? And what if they're not God-fearing parents? What if you don't have parents anymore? So,
yeah, I think it's very important that as much as possible, we involve our parents in making those decisions for us. Honoring our parents is still a principle that is to be held very highly all the way through our relationships. However, there are different ways to honor parents. Sometimes you honor your parents by calling them up, talking to them about the whole situation, and they tell you whether you have their blessing. Your parents may know you really well, better than anybody else, and know what's going to work well for you. However, there are parents that, probably some people who listen to this have to acknowledge, my parents don't know me very well, or my parents manipulate, or maybe even outright abuse, or my parents are not connected deeply with God or with me or with common sense. Sometimes a parent has made enough bad decisions relationally that maybe I need to not take their decisions too seriously. But I think as much as possible, honor our parents. And sometimes that may even mean, if worse comes to worse, you know, talking to our parents and saying, I've made this decision and I'm honoring you by being faithful to the principles that you taught me growing up. Even though right now you disagree with what I'm doing, I hope that you can love me and we can work through this together. It's a very hazardous thing to go against your parents' wishes. And yet I know there are parents who, for reasons of race or superficial things, may sometimes tell their child, no, you can't marry that person. I've seen that happen in several situations where the marriage still was beautiful and blessed by God, even though the parents pulled back and didn't want it to happen because of race or other issues.
Okay. Age gap.
Age gap. Well, if you're talking about an age gap of a 10-year-old and an 18-year-old, definitely not. If you're talking about a 50-year-old and a 58-year-old, it's a whole different ballgame. You see what I'm talking about? It's not so much age, it's maturity. When people are much younger, an age gap is very significant. An 18-year-old and a 28-year-old are worlds apart in some significant areas of maturity. A 28-year-old and a 38-year-old, probably still significantly different in many ways, but if they have good communication and conflict resolution strategies, it may not be that big a deal. 38 and 48, the gap gets smaller when maturity bridges it. So ultimately, you want to have a relationship in which, in as many ways as possible, you're on the same page. And race, culture, age gap, things like that can make more areas of conflict. So I think what's really important is that people have good communication, good conflict resolution abilities, and ultimately, especially the ability to serve one another in love, to be sacrificial, to listen to the other person, because you can bridge a lot of things if you have that deep commitment to serving each other in love.
Okay. Okay. How do you find single godly women when you can't go to church right now?
Put up a flag outside your house saying, looking for single godly women. I mean, the Lord knows where they are. You don't need 20 of them. You only need one, and he knows where that person is. My husband was in Africa, and I was living in upstate New York in a town where there wasn't even a stoplight. I didn't know where he was. All those times that I wondered, wow, that's a nice guy that I met at whatever, we were in class together or something. I wonder if that's the one. None of them were. He was a guy I'd never even seen because he was on the other side of the planet. So I think the danger is having a mindset of, who can I find? You know, every time somebody sits down next to you going, ooh, maybe this is the one. You know, we cripple ourselves sometimes in developing meaningful relationships because we're looking under every leaf, hoping that this will be the one. And I think develop a wide range of meaningful friendships, get involved in ministry in a wide variety of areas, take classes on things that you're interested in, pottery, canoeing, whatever it is that you want to do those things and meet other people who are similarly inclined. Maybe the person that you would do best with is into camping or reading clubs or theology. Put yourself in the places where people who are like-minded will also be, and build those relationships. And don't be afraid to go out of your comfort zone.
Okay. What if you got no game? Like, I have a friend named Jasper. He's got no game. And just, you know, I don't know what to tell him all the time. So you just got like no game whatsoever. You're striking out all the time. You don't know what to do. And you're just like, where do I go? I mean, we're praying for Brother Jasper right now.
One of the things people say the most to me is, I don't have the gift of singleness. And I'm like, really? If you don't have the gift of singleness, but you're single right now, what are you supposed to do? Go out and find somebody to sleep with? No. You have the gift of singleness if you're single, and it's a gift, unless you turn it into a poisonous curse, which is your choice. So you can turn it into the, poor me, why do I have to be single? My life is so horrible. Or you can make singleness a gift. I had these years that I went on mission trips. I worked in co-porter programs. I built so many rich, meaningful friendships during the time that I was single because I had the gift of singleness. And if you say you don't have the gift of singleness, maybe the gift you don't have is the gift of contentment. So if you really don't have anybody, then God is doing something in your life. He has not forgotten you. Again, this comes back to an accusation against the character of God. Is God really who he says he is in his word, or is he who I feel he is, or who my life circumstances seem to say he is? Joseph spent a lot of years in Egypt all by himself with not a soul who really understood him as far as we know. But God was with him. And when he went in the prison from cell to cell, he walked in and said, what's wrong? How do you guys look so sad today? What can I do to cheer you up? That's the gift of singleness. That's the gift of contentment. And it didn't lead to Joseph staying single all of his life. But if you have it now, make it a gift. And then you have the gift of singleness until you don't.
Okay. Can we do 2 more questions and then we'll let you go, Nicole?
Sure.
Okay, very good. Appreciate that. Thank you. I know you're in a different time zone right now, but you dated a guy and married a guy from 7 time zones. You can handle this, right? Okay.
But I'm old now, you know.
Okay. Next question is this. What do you think is the biggest challenge with young adults and relationships, romance? Like, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing them right now? Because it's a big problem, because it's not like you can find quality young adults in your church. It's not like they're plentiful. It's not like they're always around. What would you say is the biggest challenge in regards to young adults and romance right now in this day and age?
You know what I think? Let me
yeah.
tell you something that I think is the biggest challenge. It's Hollywood and Hollywood thinking. And I know that may sound bold and people might not understand what I'm talking about here, but the idea that the happily ever after, when I prance off into the sunset with somebody, is the goal of life. I think that is the biggest challenge. And the idea that if God hasn't yet given me that, he's withholding good gifts from those that seek him. He ought to give me this. I think that lie is so pervasive in our culture. We tell people essentially that the finish line of getting married is the goal of life. It's not. As you'll find out when you're married, life keeps on. You keep on having indigestion, bad things happen, you have bad hair days. It really doesn't change your life that substantially to be a married person instead of a single person. In fact, many people who get married find their lives are substantially worse. So I think the challenge that people have is discontentment, thinking that if only I could have that, then I would be truly happy. And that's not the truth. What you want to have is a deep and living connection with God. Daniel doesn't write about how horrible his life was because he didn't get married. He writes about a rich, fulfilling relationship with God. And as a prophet, his words impact us thousands of years later. If you get married or if you don't, God can do great and powerful things in your life. But many young people feel like, if I don't have a significant other, my life is miserable. So the challenge is a false finish line. And we live in an interconnected society. There are many ways to meet people all over the place and to engage with people in meaningful ways, whether we're married or single. But if we always hold up before ourselves an artificial, if only I reached that, then I would be happy, we miss out on the opportunity to live a rich and fulfilling life with Jesus at the center.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, 2 questions, and I promise you we're done. 2 questions, okay? Somebody messaged a question. I'm like, oh, that's probably a good one to respond to. Kids. What if there are already kids in the relationship?
In the romantic relationship?
Yeah, from a previous relationship.
Mm-hmm. Well, you cannot just expect that you're going to marry the person. You are also making a commitment to those children. Now, there are many different situations. Maybe these are little kids that you're now going to become a step parent to. Maybe they're 20, 25, 30-year-olds whose parent is now going to be married to you, and they may feel like, oh, wow, so you came in and stole our mom or our dad. to do the best you can to connect meaningfully with those kids and ask God for guidance. You're going to have to be willing to invest in those kids in whatever way is possible, because if you marry their parent, you have taken them on as a ministry as well. So go slowly, tread carefully, do a lot of thinking, praying, and evaluating, but don't decide based on this person has kids, I don't want kids. Maybe it's not about you. Maybe it's about serving God. So serve God to the best of your ability where you are. Yes, keep your eyes wide open to the challenges that will come with kids, but don't decide based on I don't want. Decide based on, is this going to be a way to glorify God?
Gotcha. I guess the last question is this, because there's more questions. What would you like to say to a group of young adults right now that are listening, that are watching this, in regards to relationships, in regards to loneliness and community? What are your final thoughts to your charge to us?
You will never regret pouring yourself into relationship with God first. And in that context of pouring yourself into relationship with God first, you can then truly love your neighbor as yourself. Go into relationships not looking for ways to be ministered unto, but to minister. And yet at the same time, keep your eyes wide open. Don't go into it trying to rescue somebody. You know, when you see a person engages in any form of behavior that's abusive, no matter how slight, you see they don't treat their mother right, if they cheat somebody, if they laugh or use coarse language about things that ought not to be laughed about, take those things very, very seriously. Because all of us at the end of time are called to ministry. Whatever ministry you're in, it doesn't matter if you're a carpenter or a plumber or a nurse or a teacher or a preacher. You want to be a teammate with someone else in ministry. And if this person is not going to be a person who's passionately committed to serving the Lord with all of their hearts, they're not going to be committed to serving you, and your marriage will not be what you dreamed for it to be.
Excellent. Appreciate that. By the way, you've written some books and you're going to be writing some more books. Could you tell us about that real quick?
Sure. I'm writing books that they're kind of children's books, but I'm writing them for all ages, or ages 9 to 109 is what is written on the cover. It's the tales of the Exodus. I'm telling the story of the children of Caleb and Joshua as they experienced slavery and the plagues and the Passover, the Exodus, and life in the wilderness, and weaving in 28 fundamental beliefs and just answering the deep questions that really paralyzed me in my deciding whether or not to serve God back when I was young, and things that I find people of all ages ask me, like, why does God allow suffering if he's a God of love? Why doesn't he fix things? How does God balance justice and mercy so that he eventually makes things right? But why doesn't he make things right now? Now while I'm hurting, now while people are treating me wrong, now while I don't have a job. And so I'm grappling with those questions, and I'm basically writing the series also for helping people who are healing from emotional trauma, from abuse, from addiction, showing through the story of the Exodus, because the Exodus is a picture of what we go through at the end of time, showing through the story of the Exodus what lessons God has for his people at the end of time. So I'm talking about the sanctuary, about true faith and humility, the forgiveness, those kinds of things that can
Where do
only
they get these books?
explored in a deep way in scripture. You can find them on Amazon. They're also in most ABCs. I'm writing right now. I have 5 books planned. So the last book is the one that I wrote first. That's called Sanctuary Light. And that one you can read all by itself if you want to just get one book and see if you like it. That one is the story of these children experiencing the gospel in the sanctuary. And then I've gone back and I'm writing Faith Roots and Humble Stones. Those are both available on Amazon or in the Adventist Book Center, as well as Sanctuary Light. Very soon I will have Wings of Love out, hopefully in the next few weeks. And then Joseph's Bones, hopefully by Christmas anyway, hopefully before that. Those 4 go through the story of being in Egypt before Moses comes back, and as they're experiencing slavery and the plagues haven't come yet, and then going through the plagues. So the first 3 plagues are in humble stones, then the next 4 in wings of love, and Joseph's bones finishes with the Passover and goes all the way till they're on the other side of the Red Sea. Then eventually I'll probably write 2 more, I'm guessing, in between there about life in the wilderness, dealing with, you know, the manna, the water from the rock, the 10 commandments, the setting up of the priesthood, so that I can fit in all 28 fundamental beliefs.
Are you ever going to write that book on relationships? We got more than 100 people on here. I'm sure many of them would buy that book.
That's next. After I finish this set, I want to write the book Crawling in Love. I have about half of it written. So we keep talking about this. We really need to get the book written. But a lot of the principles that I'm sharing in the book Crawling in Love are in some audioverse where we talk about how do you find the person to marry? How do you know who to marry? How do you know when to run? Those kinds of things.
That's an audioverse, right? Though that series.
Audioverse.org.
Okay. Well,
a lot of the seminars are there.
Okay. Well, just a plug. Would you be willing to do another Growth Labs with us very soon?
Thanks, Anil, for putting me on the spot. You're not even repentant.
Nope.
Yes. Yes.
I appreciate that. Again, thank you everybody for listening and watching. Nicole, we appreciate you just taking time to, you know, you're with your family, you got a busy schedule, even with quarantine going on, you're writing, you're counseling, you're, you know, homeschooling, but thank you so much again for making time for us at you know, this very interesting time. Again, you can check out those books on Amazon. Nicole is someone who is active as well in regards to the stuff that she posts and stuff. So she may not get to you right away if you have questions, but in time, you'll definitely get an answer. That's one thing I know about her. The other thing I would say is this, just letting you guys know the rest of our schedule for this week. Tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we have Vespers. Look for the link on CCC Young Adults. CCC Young Adults. We have a Vespers program. And then Sabbath morning, we encourage everyone to find their local church's live stream. You can find, if you don't have one, you can find one, I'm sure, nearby or somebody else you like. But then Sabbath afternoon at 5 o'clock, we're hosting a Vespers also. So thank you again, everybody. God bless. Nicole, would you mind praying for everybody here?
I will be glad to. Father in heaven, thank you so much for bringing all of us together to experience community with one another and with you as we explore your word and how it applies to some of the deepest and closest issues to our hearts. Lord, I pray that you will help each one here to be able to develop meaningful community with others and to deal with the pain of loneliness, however it hits us. And Lord, for those that are involved in romance, I pray that you will draw them close to you, help their relationships to glorify you, and help this time of quarantine to be an opportunity for rich growth. And for those who are not there yet, Lord, I pray that you will guide them toward the person that they're meant to be with, that they can grow in relationship with you and the other person at the right time, the right way. And wherever you want them to go, Lord, help them to connect deeply with you, whether it's marriage or singleness. Help us all to live for your glory and not our own. Thank you, Lord. We love you. Amen.
Amen. Amen. God bless you, Nicole. God bless everyone.
Thank you.
And welcome. You can find this recording, by the way. It's on the CCC Young Adult Facebook page. It's automatically recorded because it's on Zoom. God bless.
No, I know. What are you going to send me as a reward for not picking on you? I mean,
goodbye, everybody. Thank you, Nicole, for your mercy. I appreciate it big time. So, all right. God bless.
Bye-bye.